You're watching the Run For It YouTube channel. I'm Finlay, and this episode is a comparison episode of the HOKA Bondi and HOKA Clifton running shoes. Now, the reason for doing this new review is that one of the most popular episodes on our channel is a review episode of the HOKA Bondi 8 running shoes versus the HOKA Clifton 9 running shoes. There's lots of questions and comments on that episode, so you're very clearly keen to know more about the differences in these models and how they stack up against one another. So now that we're on to the HOKA Bondi 9 running shoes and HOKA Clifton 10 running shoes, we thought it would make sense to update the content. Hope you enjoy. Let's start with the cushioning then and how they feel underfoot. So the Bondi 9 feature a super critical midsole foam, and the Clifton 10 feature a compression molded EVA foam. And this means the cushioning in the Bondi is both softer and more energy returning than the foam in the Clifton. The stack height in the Bondi is also slightly higher than the stack height in the Clifton, so that means the Bondi offers slightly more underfoot protection. There's also a difference in the drop. When the Bondi were updated, the entire midsole stack height was increased by 2mm in comparison to the previous version. However, when the Clifton 10 were updated, only the heel stack height was increased. It went up by 3mm. So that now means that the Bondi have a 5mm heel to toe drop and the Clifton have an 8mm heel to toe drop. Both models feature HOKA's smooth meta rocker geometry. And all that means is that the midsole is curved from heel to toe. So basically that curved geometry helps roll your feet forward, and that can help reduce some of the load on your working muscles, particularly in the lower leg area. So if you suffer from tight calf muscles, then both models could be a very good option for you. So how does the cushioning feel to run in both models? Well, as you'd expect, the Bondi cushioning feels softer and plusher underfoot. But as it's a supercritical midsole foam in the Bondi, it also feels bouncier. And this is an interesting dynamic because, while the Clifton are lighter and more responsive than the Bondi arguably feels better to run in at steadier paces. It just feels more lively, more energetic under your feet. However, on the other hand, if you're the type of runner who enjoys a slightly more responsive ride, when you pick up the pace, then the Clifton cushioning is probably going to feel better for you. As there's a difference in the drop, the rocker geometry does feel a little bit different in each model, but it will depend on your biomechanics and how you run in terms of which suits you better. It's really hard to predict whether you're going to enjoy the rocker geometry in the Clifton or the rocker geometry in the Bondi. You also might like them equally, just for different reasons. Personally, the rocker geometry in the Bondi just suits my gait slightly better. I find it a little bit more natural, a little bit easier to run in than the Clifton. But again, that's just my personal opinion, and everyone's going to be different here. It's not that one is better than the other. So overall, the Bondi cushioning will feel best when you're looking for maximum protection, maximum cushioning, and a really soft underfoot ride. Whereas the Clifton will feel best when you're looking for a protective yet responsive underfoot experience. When it comes to support, both the Bondi and the Clifton are neutral running shoes, but they both offer a good level of support. And this is thanks to HOKA's rear foot focused active foot frame. So to explain further, what this means is the back of the midsole foam at the heel section here rises up on both sides, and this cradles your feet, improving the inherent stability of the midsole. Now again, this is going to vary from runner to runner, but it's likely that the Bondi offers slightly more support than the Clifton, and that's mainly because the base of the Bondi midsole is slightly broader than the base of the Clifton, so that just improves the inherent stability of the midsole. Additionally, because the midsole in the Bondi is slightly thicker, it just feels a little bit more supportive, especially during your longer distance runs or on the days when your legs are feeling particularly tired. From a fit perspective, while the Clifton 10 are slightly broader and more spacious than the previous version, The Bondi still offers a slightly more generous fit and feel than the Clifton. The toe box just feels a little bit more spacious, and the midfoot doesn't hug your feet quite as much. So if you're looking for a little bit more space for your feet to splay, then you probably want to be choosing the Bondi. On the other hand, if you have a slightly narrower foot shape, or you just prefer a slightly more secure fit, then you probably want to be choosing the Clifton. I think it's worth noting though that the fits aren't overly different, and you could definitely transition between both models, and we're going to come back to that point slightly later. And also worth noting that if you just prefer the idea of the Clifton, then you can opt for the wide fit option in that if you would like more space. Interestingly, the upper fabric in the Clifton feels slightly softer than the upper fabric in the Bondi, and this is really down to the fact that the Clifton has a jacquard knit material, whereas the Bondi just has an engineered mesh. Both models have nice cushioning on the tongue. In the Bondi, there's a little bit more padding around the inside of the heel collar, which obviously feels very comfortable. And importantly, both models have the tapered back heel design, which just makes it easier to slip the shoes on and off. When it comes to durability, again, the Bondi should last slightly longer than the Clifton, and that's down to a couple of factors. Firstly, the supercritical midsole foam should last longer than the compression molded EVA in the Clifton. And next, there is slightly more outsole rubber on the bottom of the Bondi than there is over the Clifton. So while that adds a little bit of weight, you should get that back in terms of how long the shoes last. However, it's worth mentioning that the Clifton 10 should last longer than the previous version, and that's mainly down to that 3mm of extra cushioning in the heel. And we also think there's a little bit more outsole coverage on the lateral edge of the heel. It's worth noting though that neither the Clifton or the Bondi are the most durable running shoes out there. You may be able to see this on the camera, the wear on the lateral edge of the heel in the Bondi. Now, that's after 345 kilometers of running, which is a decent amount, but we're testing a lot of everyday mileage running shoes, particularly max cushioned running shoes, which are lasting well over 1,000 kilometers of running, and shoes which at 700 to 800 kilometers of running aren't showing that sort of wear yet. So it'd be very unlikely that these will last on to that 800, 900k of running. So it's just something to bear in mind. If durability is at the absolute top of your priority list, you might actually want to look at an alternative model to get maximum mileage out of your running shoes. So how do you pick between the two then? Well, hopefully it's clear that the main differences lie in the cushioning. The Bondi offers a softer and more energetic underfoot experience than the Clifton. So in theory, the Bondi should be the best options for the longer runs and also the recovery days, because the cushioning just helps take more stress off your working muscles and joints. However, you may just generally prefer that experience for your everyday miles, irrespective of how easy or how long you're going. But everyone is different, and if you're the type of runner who enjoys a more responsive ride, irrespective of what speed or distance you're running at, then the Clifton are likely to feel like the better options for you. And it's important to note that while we're saying this offers a more responsive ride than the Bondi and that the Bondi are more cushioned, these still offer lots of protection for everyday miles, and some runners will find these very comfortable for their long distance days. And of course, you could have a place for both models in your shoe rotation. The great thing about the Clifton and the Bondi is that they're similar enough that you could transition between each model on different days. I'm running in both shoes and find it very comfortable doing that. But at the same time, there's enough of a difference that you might have a preference using one for one type of run over the other, and vice versa. Additionally, if you use the Clifton for your everyday miles when your legs are technically feeling a little bit fresher, then you might notice a greater difference or benefit when you opt for the softer Bondi on those longer distance runs or on those recovery days when your legs are tired, particularly the days after those higher intensity interval sessions. And finally, on the point of shoe rotation, there are definitely some benefits between rotating your running shoes, particularly with your everyday mileage running shoes, the shoes that you do the most volume in. And that's because running in slightly different stack heights, like different geometries, will work or load muscle groups or tendons in slightly different ways. That could help mitigate the chances of developing overuse injuries. Additionally, the shoes do actually recover between runs. So yes, believe it or not, the foams will rise back up again slightly more if you can have a decent break between uses. So that's obviously not a factor if you're having a couple of days or a day's rest between each of your runs. But if you're running on a daily basis, consecutive days, then alternating between two different shoes could genuinely increase how long your shoes will last. And on that note, it's a good time to talk about walking in these models, because a lot of people choose the Clifton or the Bondi for walking in. That's obviously down to fashion reasons as well as functionality reasons. So the rocker geometry in HOKA running shoes, in the Bondi and the Clifton, that helps roll your feet forward, can have a lot of benefits for you when you're walking, because it can reduce the pressure on the plantar fascia, the load on the Achilles tendon, and even areas such as the big toe joint. This is why a lot of podiatrists are recommending people to get HOKA running shoes for walking. Now, when it comes to walking in your running shoes, we really advise you to not do that. And that's because while you might not consider you're walking very far in them, you might walk a couple of miles to work and then a couple of miles home, or maybe even less than that. Standing around in running shoes, having them on your feet all day, will put a lot of pressure through the midsole, and it will start to compress it down, and ultimately it will compromise the performance when you're running in them, and it really will reduce the lifetime of the shoes. So if you can, try and not use the shoes that you're running in that you're going to be walking in. And if you are picking between these models for walking in, then you might find obviously that both options are pretty good for you. Space is obviously going to be a factor, the fit of the shoes. So if you're looking for a little bit more space, you might enjoy the Bondi, but obviously you can opt for the wide fit version, the Clifton, for more space as well. So if you have a Morton's New Roma, you're definitely going to be wanting to opt for the wider fit version. Even though the Bondi are more cushioned and the midsole stack is a little bit thicker, the Clifton are potentially going to be the better option for walking. They just feel a little bit lighter and a little bit more agile under the foot, but still are packed with protection. And it just could be the case that you're a little bit less aware of the Clifton under your feet than you are in the Bondi, which is a little bit more practical and hopefully a little bit more comfortable for day-to-day use. And that brings me to the end of this comparison episode. Hopefully that answers all of your questions, but if not, please comment on the episode and we'll do our best to get back to you as soon as we can. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And as always, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this. See you soon.